Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the psychological evaluations of serial killers. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Aileen Wuornos. So, Aileen Wuornos was an American serial killer who gained notoriety for murdering 7 men in Florida between 1989 and 1990. She was born on February 29th, 1956. Wuornos was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection on October 2002. Her life and crimes were the subject of media attention and were later portrayed in the film Monster, as well as several other films. And I've seen a lot of these films that were based on her life, and I followed her story, and it's a very, very interesting and sad story. Professionals in the field have analyzed the Wuornos case based on all of the available information. And here are some of the key points that are related to the psychological evaluation of Aileen Wuornos. The first one we're going to talk about is childhood trauma and abuse. Aileen Wuornos experienced a traumatic childhood marked by abuse and instability. She claimed to have been sexually abused by her grandfather and allegedly physically abused by her parents. Her early experiences likely contributed to the development of psychological distress and emotional instability. It also would have added what we always called a hair trigger. You know, she was quick to react violently and angrily because of the abuse that she suffered as a child. The next thing we'll talk about is substance abuse. Now, Wuornos struggled with substance abuse issues, particularly with alcohol and drugs. Substance abuse often coexists with several different mental health challenges, and Wuornos' use of substances may have exacerbated her existing psychological issues. And I'm sure that, like a lot of people on these lists, she used alcohol and drugs to self-medicate and help her to deal with her past trauma and kind of try to keep herself as sane as she possibly could. The next thing we're going to talk about is her mental health issues, because Wuornos had a history of mental health problems. Because Wuornos had a history of mental health problems, including diagnosed personality disorders. While there are reports suggesting that she may have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, the exact nature and the extent of her mental health conditions are not fully documented. But there are a lot of reports that suggest that she had borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder. And one thing I can tell you about both borderline and bipolar is there is a very short fuse and violent outbursts associated with both of those disorders. And a lot of times when people who suffer from bipolar and borderline, when they do blow their stack and get angry, to a normal person, what they're angry about seems like absolutely nothing, like some small trivia thing. But they can react not only with anger and violence, but with explosive anger and explosive violence. The next thing we're going to talk about is paranoia and distrust. Wuornos displayed signs of paranoia and a deep-seated distrust of others. Her history of troubled relationships, coupled with her traumatic experiences in her past, more than likely contributed to her difficulties forming and maintaining healthy connections and healthy relationships. It's one of those things where your past experiences paint a picture of what your future is going to be. So everything in your past has been one way, so that's what you expect out of everyone you meet, that they're going to be that way as well. Next thing I want to talk about is violence as a coping mechanism. So Wuornos' crimes were characterized by a pattern of violence, which she claimed was a means of self-defense against perceived threats. Her actions may be understood as maladaptive coping mechanisms, stemming from a combination of psychological distress, past trauma, and substance abuse. So the substance abuse clouds the mind. The past trauma makes her expect the worst out of everybody she meets. And the psychological distress having to do with the borderline and the bipolar is going to make her paranoid. It's going to make her have a short fuse and to react violently and suddenly with very little provocation. So you add all of that together, and in her mind, it seems like violence is the only way to defend herself from what she sees as a imminent threat to her safety. Next thing we'll talk about is lack of remorse. And this is a big one in a lot of trials and a lot of serial killers is lack of remorse. Throughout legal proceedings, Wuornos showed pretty much a complete lack of remorse for her crimes. Her statements and demeanor suggested a certain detachment from the severity of her actions. Now, this is potentially linked to her mental health and the coping mechanisms that she employed. So, basically, everything I just talked about, the maladaptive coping mechanisms, the past trauma, the substance abuse, the bipolar and borderline personality disorder, the short fuse, the overblown reactions, the reactions of extreme violence, all of that she felt was justified because she felt she was acting in self-defense against men who were trying to harm her. Now, the reality of that situation is not what she thought the reality of that situation is, but at least according to her, in her mind, she felt she was in danger, so that's why she reacted the way she reacted. Now, through a normal person's mind, we're going to look at a situation like that and we're going to say, there's no way that 9 different guys were trying to hurt you to the point where you had to murder them to save yourself. Not 9 times. I can see it happening once to somebody, maybe even twice if you're very, very unlucky, but 9? But in her mind, it made sense. The next thing I want to talk about is the impact of isolation. Wuornos led a transient and isolated lifestyle. Her lack of stable social connections may have contributed to a sense of desperation and a sense of hopelessness. Factors that can be linked to mental health challenges and criminal behavior. Now, Wuornos wasn't completely isolated. She did have a woman that she was romantically involved with, and she did know some people, but even with the people that she was quote unquote close to, there was that certain amount of detachment there to where it would lead her to feel isolated and like she had no help with anything. She had to do it all on her own. And that would kind of tie in with a lot of these other things that we were talking about her having a lack of remorse because she felt she was acting in self-defense, about her reacting in a severely violent way to a minor threat because she felt isolated, like she was all alone and she had no one that could help her, so she had to react that way in order to ensure her own safety. Next thing we'll talk about is the legal representation and competency. Wuornos' legal representation raised concerns about her competency to stand trial. Her attorneys argued that her mental health issues impaired her ability to fully comprehend the legal proceedings against her. Competency evaluations are crucial in ensuring a fair trial and just legal outcomes. But also, there's something that is massively overused and massively misused by defense attorneys to try to get guilty clients off of a charge. They try to claim insanity, basically. Now, the claim of not being competent to stand trial because she couldn't understand what was going on, I don't think that really holds water because the main thing that she had was borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder. Now, while those do have you kind of skewing reality a little bit and getting very, very angry very, very fast and having violent and extreme outbursts and that kind of stuff, it doesn't make you stupid, okay? She wasn't suffering from mental retardation or any kind of handicap like that. She was fully competent and aware of who she was, what was going on. She claims she acted in self defense. So if she's claiming she acted in self defense, that means she understands that there was a threat against her. She understands that she was trying to defend herself. She understands that that is her plea. So that means she is fully competent to stand trial because she understands what's going on. And that's the way it was basically ruled by the judge, is that she was competent to stand trial. So it's important to approach the assessment of individuals like Aileen Wuornos with a combination of sensitivity and the recognition of the complex interplay between mental health, trauma, and criminal behavior. But it's also important to approach the assessment with a sense of reality and a sense of the brutality of her crime. In this case, her crimes. A lot of times when you do a psychological assessment or a psychological evaluation of somebody, you're trying to explain why they did the things that they did, what led them down that path, what was the motivation for them to act that way. And that can come across as excusing the crime, as making excuses for it, and saying, oh, poor her, and taking the focus off the victims. I want at this point of the video to say that that's not my intention whatsoever. She murdered these men in cold blood, and she was found guilty of it in a court of law, and she was sentenced to death, and she was executed. And that execution was just, according to her crimes and her convictions. I'm not ever in these videos saying that I feel bad or sorry for the serial killer that we're talking about. I'm not condoning the crimes that she did. I think that there's never an excuse unless you're trying to actually defend yourself or your family or something like that. But outside of that, there's never an excuse for using violence and hurting people and killing people. It's just not right. That's why it's against the law. And I just wanted to definitely clear that up. Okay. And I'd also like to say that her crimes were heinous, but understanding the underlying factors that contributed to that crime can further discussions about mental health, childhood trauma, and the need for comprehensive mental health interventions and support systems for people. And I think this is a very, very, very important point to make, because mental health is not looked at as important enough in this country. A lot of these things sometimes can be prevented if you can get people in to see doctors that can help them, psychiatrists that can help figure out what's wrong with that person. If it is a chemical imbalance, like borderline and bipolar are chemical imbalances in the brain. Okay, those people, no amount of therapy is going to make that go away. They are born that way and they're going to die that way. You can control it somewhat through medication, and there are therapies that can help with borderline, like cognitive behavioral therapy is a perfect example. That is a therapy that teaches them how to interact with the world like normal people do, or as close as they can get to that. It helps them to control their violent outbursts. It helps them to understand that a lot of times the way they see a situation or the way they hear what somebody says to them is not actually what that person is trying to say. So they'll read into it way differently than what you actually intended it to sound like. And they will go off the handle because they think they're being attacked. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches them how to process that information better. It teaches them how to get along in the world and to better fit in with society. So there are therapies that can help, but they have to be joined with medication as well, because what we're dealing with is a chemical imbalance in the brain. That can't be solved by therapy. That has to be solved by pharmacology. Okay, so you got the two working together. And make no mistake, borderline personality disorder is a very severe mental condition. Bipolar is on the same path. It's not as severe as borderline, but it is still rather severe. And those people, they need help. You know, they need medication, they need therapy, and they need support. And that's another branch of this tree that's very important. They need somebody that cares, that will be there for them and help them and be their support system. And that's what your family is supposed to be for. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know down in the comments section what you guys think. As always, it's up to you to make up your own minds. And I will catch you on the next one. Until I speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do I. Bye-bye.